My daughter-in-law shoved me in my own kitchen and walked out like she'd done nothing wrong. The next morning, I left a folder on her car seat. She thought it was the insurance paperwork she'd been asking me to sign for 3 months. She texted me from the driveway. Finally. She had no idea what was actually in it. I was going through my fishing tackle box when it happened. 53 years of accumulating lures, leaders, and hooks, and I still can't find anything when I need it. Retired postal carrier. 31 years walking routes in Dayton, Ohio, and my knees have the receipts. I just found a Rapala I thought I'd lost back in 2019 when my daughter-in-law, Cheryl, came to the back door without knocking. She never knocked. My son Robbie married her 6 years ago. I liked her at first. She was sharp, organized, the kind of woman who remembered everyone's birthday and showed up with the right gift. When my wife Donna passed 4 years ago, Cheryl handled the catering for the reception after the funeral. I was grateful. I told her so. I think that was the beginning of the problem. Some people read gratitude as a transaction. You thanked me, now you owe me. The money started small, $800 for their water heater 2 years ago. I didn't mind. Robbie's my son. Then $2,200 for a car repair. That seemed expensive. But what do I know about transmissions? Then a conversation at Thanksgiving where Cheryl mentioned, very casually, that they were thinking about refinancing and the closing costs were going to be rough this month. I wrote a check for $3,500 before the pie was served. She thanked me warmly and moved on to talking about her sister's vacation in Portugal. I have a pension and Social Security. I'm not wealthy, but I'm comfortable, which in Cheryl's mind apparently translated to inexhaustible. After the refinancing check, the requests came faster, not always from Cheryl directly. Sometimes Robbie would call, voice strained, and I could hear her in the background coaching him. Dad, we're just a little short this month. Dad, the timing's just bad right now. Dad, you know we'd pay you back if we could. I kept a notebook, old habit from the post office. You track things, or you lose them. By last January, I had documented $41,200 over 26 months. Every date, every amount, every excuse. Donna would have said I was being cold-blooded. Maybe, but Donna also would have been the one to catch this before it got this far. She was smarter than me about people. The day Cheryl shoved me, she'd come over to pick up a roasting pan she'd left after Christmas. I was in the kitchen making a sandwich. She walked in, grabbed the pan from the cabinet, then turned around and said she needed me to sign the insurance beneficiary paperwork. She'd been asking me to update my life insurance documents so that Robbie was listed as sole primary beneficiary, cutting out my daughter Patrice entirely. I told her the same thing I'd told her twice before. That wasn't something I was willing to do. Patrice and Robbie would split everything equally, same as I'd always planned, same as Donna would have wanted. Cheryl's face did something I'd seen before, but never directed at me. Her expression went flat. Still polite on the surface, but underneath nothing. She set the roasting pan down on the counter and told me I was being selfish, that I was punishing Robbie for no reason, that Patrice lived in Phoenix and barely called and didn't deserve the same consideration as a son who actually showed up. I said Patrice called every Sunday. That showing up and borrowing money weren't the same thing. That I wasn't changing the beneficiary. She shoved me, both hands, flat against my chest. Not hard enough to knock me over, but hard enough that I grabbed the counter. The Rapala lure I'd left on the edge went skittering across the linoleum. I stood there, 67 years old, hand gripping the counter, looking at my daughter-in-law. She looked surprised at herself for about half a second. Then her chin came up. She said I'd pushed her to it. She grabbed the roasting pan and walked out. I stood in my kitchen for a while after she left, tested my footing. Everything still worked. I picked up the lure off the floor, set it back on the counter. The sandwich sat on the cutting board getting warm. I wasn't hungry anymore. My neighbor across the street, a retired school teacher named Opal, was out pulling weeds when I came to the front window. She looked up at my house, I could tell from her expression she'd heard the door slam. Maybe more than that. Opal had sharp ears and thin windows between us. I went to my desk in the spare room. The one with the filing cabinet I bought at an estate sale in 2011. I opened the bottom drawer where I kept the notebook. I also picked up my phone and called my daughter. Patrice answered on the second ring. Dad? You sound weird. What happened? I told her. All of it. Not just today. Not just the shove. The whole notebook. Every check. Every call. Every Thanksgiving guilt trip. Patrice was quiet for a long time. Then she said, Dad, I'm coming to Dayton. I told her not to. Not yet. She said, You're not going to let this go, are you? I said, No. Good, she said. After we hung up, I sat at the desk and thought about what Donna would have said. Probably something about how I should have drawn a line 2 years ago. She was right about most things. I'd been soft. Because Robbie was my son, and I kept hoping the version of him that was good and decent would prevail over the version that let his wife run the show. I'd been waiting for him to show up. He'd been letting her show up instead. I didn't sleep well. I got up at 2 in the morning and made coffee and went through the notebook again. Spread everything on the kitchen table. Bank statements showing every withdrawal. Screenshots of texts from Robbie where he'd asked for money. The one time Cheryl had texted me directly asking about the insurance paperwork, which I'd printed and saved because something felt wrong about it even then. At 7, I called a number I hadn't dialed in 4 years. My old friend Leonard, who'd retired from the county prosecutor's office, and now did estate and family law out of a small office on Brown Street. We'd fished the Great Miami River together for 15 years before his hip got bad. Leonard. It's me. Something happened yesterday you should know about. He was quiet while I talked. I could hear him clicking a pen on his desk, same as he always did when he was thinking. When I finished, he said, Do you have documentation? I told him about the notebook, the bank records, the texts. He said, The physical contact. Any witnesses? I thought about Opal. Maybe. Neighbor might have heard something. He said, Come in at 10. Leonard's office smelled like old paper and decent coffee. He had 2 paralegals and a secretary named Yvonne who'd worked for him since before he knew him. She handed me a cup without asking how I took it. She remembered. I spread the notebook and printouts across his conference table. Leonard put on his reading glasses and went through everything slowly. His pen kept clicking. When he finished, he said, 41,000. I said, 200. 41, too. He looked at me over his glasses. None of this documented as loans? Some, not most. He set the pen down. The good news is the physical assault, even if minor, gives you standing to establish a pattern. The financial piece is harder without signed loan agreements, but the documentation is strong enough that an attorney letter will get their attention. How much contact do you want to have with them going forward? I said I needed to think about that. He said, Think fast, because right now you have momentum. These situations have a way of getting muddied when the other side has time to build a narrative. I asked him what he recommended as a first move. He said, We send a formal demand letter documenting the financial transfers and requesting repayment with a 30-day window. And separately, we address the assault. Not criminal, not yet, but a formal cease and desist that puts her on record. That protects you. I thought about Robbie, his voice on those calls, strained, coached. The version of my son I was watching turned into someone I didn't recognize. I said, Do it. On the way home, I stopped at Opal's. She answered the door in gardening gloves, dirt still on her forearms. I said, Opal, I need to ask you something. She said, I figured you would. I asked her what she'd heard. She told me she'd been in her front yard when she heard the back door slam. Then she heard raised voices, at least one of them female, and then a sound like something heavy sliding on a hard surface. Then another door slam. Then my car didn't move, which told her it wasn't a normal leaving. She said, That woman has a hard voice when she's angry. Carrie's right across the street. I asked if she'd be willing to write down what she heard, date and time, and sign it. She didn't hesitate. She went inside and came back 10 minutes later with a handwritten statement on her personal stationery. Her handwriting was precise. 40 years in a classroom will do that. I stopped at the drugstore on the way home and bought a padded envelope. That night, I sat at the kitchen table and built a folder. Copy of the demand letter Leonard had emailed me. Copy of the cease and desist. Copy of the first 4 pages of the notebook, showing dates and amounts. Opal's statement. A cover page I wrote myself. 1 paragraph, no emotion, just facts. I sealed it in the padded envelope. Wrote Cheryl's name on the outside. The next morning, she had a dentist appointment. Robbie had mentioned it weeks ago in passing, the way married people mention each other's schedules without thinking. I knew her car would be in the driveway at 8, and she'd leave at 8:30. At 8:15, I walked across the street, put the envelope on her driver's seat through the unlocked door, and walked back home. At 8:42, my phone lit up. Her name. I let it ring. She called again. I let her ring again. Then a text. What is this? Then another. This is insane. You can't be serious. Then Robbie's name on my screen. Dad, pick up. I set the phone face down and made breakfast. By noon, I had 11 missed calls split between them. I called Leonard and told him the delivery had been made. He said, "Good. Now don't engage. Let the 30 days run." That was the hardest part. Not the documentation, not the legal process, not even the shove. The silence. Robbie called every day for the first week. First angry, then confused, then something that sounded almost like his old voice. Quiet and unsure. "Dad, I don't understand why you're doing this. I didn't know she was going to tell you about the insurance paperwork like that. I didn't know she was going to." He didn't finish the sentence. I said, "I know you didn't, Robbie." He said, "So then why?" I said, "Because this is bigger than the paperwork." He didn't have an answer for that. Patrice flew in on a Thursday. She sat at my kitchen table and went through the notebook the way Leonard had, methodically, not speaking. When she finished, she closed it and put her hand flat on the cover and just sat there for a moment. She said, "Mom knew about some of this, didn't she?" I said, "The first year or so, not the full amount." She said, "Did she say anything?" I said, "She said Cheryl was very good at making people feel like helping her was their own idea." Patrice laughed, short and sad. "Yeah, that's right. We ate dinner and talked about other things. She'd gotten a promotion. Her oldest had made the travel soccer team. Normal life continuing parallel to this one. I was glad she'd come, even though I'd told her not to." Before she went to bed, she said, "Dad, I want you to know whatever happens with Robbie, that's not on you." I said it felt like it was. She said, "He chose her. He keeps choosing her. That's his, not yours." I thought about that for a long time after she went to sleep. 3 weeks into the 30-day window, Leonard got a call from an attorney named Whitmore, representing Cheryl and Robbie. Whitmore said his clients disputed the characterization of the financial transfers, disputed the characterization of the physical incident, and were prepared to counterclaim defamation if the demand letter was shared with any third parties. Leonard called me after. He sounded almost pleased. "That response tells us a lot," he said. I asked what it told us. He said that they're scared. A confident person hires an attorney to negotiate. A scared person hires an attorney to threaten. They threatened. So they're scared. He also said Whitmore had slipped up by using the word incident, because if there was no incident, there was nothing to slip up about. That same week, something I hadn't anticipated. A call from a man named Grover, who said he was Cheryl's uncle on her mother's side. He'd gotten my number through her brother, who'd heard through the family that something legal was happening. He said he wasn't calling to take sides. He was calling because, when he'd heard the specific details, certain things had started to make sense to him. He said, "How much did she get from you?" I told him. He was quiet. Then he said, "She got 60 from her grandmother before the old lady passed. The family always thought it was a legitimate loan. She had paperwork, promissory notes, the whole thing. Grandmother died before she could collect. I said, "Was the grandmother sick when she signed the notes?" Long pause. "Dementia," he said. "Early stages. We thought she still had capacity." I wrote his name and number in the notebook. Leonard added an affidavit from Grover to our file. It changed the texture of the case. This wasn't a couple who'd stretched their finances too thin and borrowed from family. This was a pattern, and the pattern had a history before me. On the 29th day of the 30-day window, Whitmore sent a response. His clients were prepared to acknowledge the financial transfers, not as loans, but as gifts, and to acknowledge that a physical altercation had occurred, characterized as unintentional contact during a heated disagreement. They were prepared to offer a settlement, no repayment of funds, no formal admission, a signed agreement that all parties would have no further contact. I read the letter twice. Then I called Leonard. He said, "They're offering you goodbye. No accountability, no money, just gone." I said, "That's not enough." He said he agreed. We declined. Robbie called the night after the response went out. He sounded different. Not coached. Just tired. He said, "Dad, I need to talk to you without her around." I said, "Okay." He said, "Can I come over?" He sat at the same kitchen table where this all started. He looked older than 34. He had his mother's eyes and he was using them to look at his hands. He said, "I didn't know about Grover's mother, the grandmother thing." I didn't know that. I said, "I believe you." He said, "How long have you been keeping the notebook?" I said, "Since the beginning." He put his face in his hands. When he looked up, his eyes were red. He said, "I don't know how to fix this." I said, "I know." He said, "She's not a bad person. She's just." He didn't finish that either. I said, "Robbie, I love you. That hasn't changed, but I can't keep pretending this is normal." He said, "I know." He left before 9, hugged me at the door longer than he had in years. I stood on the porch and watched his truck until I couldn't see it anymore. Leonard filed a formal complaint with the county civil court 2 days later. Financial exploitation of an elderly adult. The statute wasn't a perfect fit, since I was 67 and still sharp, Leonard's word. But the documentation of systematic financial manipulation, combined with the physical incident and the pattern from Grover's information, made a credible case. We weren't after criminal prosecution. We were after a civil judgment that put the $41,000 on record as debt, acknowledged the physical incident formally, and established that the pattern was real and documented. Cheryl fired Whitmore and hired someone from Columbus. New attorney, sharper, faster. She sent a letter directly to Leonard that was more aggressive. Accused me of fabricating the notebook. Accused Opal of lying. Questioned Grover's motives given his own family conflicts with Cheryl's branch. It was a good letter in the sense that it covered a lot of ground quickly. It was also the kind of letter that, when you read it carefully, told you exactly what the other side was afraid of. They were afraid of the notebook. They were afraid of Opal. They were afraid of Grover. Good, I thought. They should be. The mediation was held at a conference center on the east side of Dayton on a Tuesday in March. Neutral location. Neutral mediator. Both attorneys present. Cheryl sat across the table from me for the first time since the kitchen. She dressed carefully, professional. She looked at me once when I sat down and then didn't look at me again. Robbie wasn't there. He'd told me through Patrice that he couldn't do it. Couldn't sit in our room. I understood. The mediator was a retired judge named Callahan. Gray-haired, unhurried. He'd clearly done this many times. He let both sides speak. Cheryl's new attorney was articulate, painted a picture of a daughter-in-law who'd done everything she could for her father-in-law during a grief-stricken period, accepted gifts given freely and without expectation, and was now being dragged into legal proceedings by a man who'd changed his mind about his generosity. I sat with my hands flat on the table. Leonard presented the notebook, the bank records, the texts, Opal's statement, Grover's affidavit. The attorney's letter where Whitmore had used the word incident. Callahan asked Cheryl directly whether she'd made physical contact with me on the day in question. Her attorney started to answer. Callahan held up one hand without looking at him. He kept looking at Cheryl. She said it was a misunderstanding. Callahan said, "That's not what I asked." She said, "There may have been contact." He nodded slowly and wrote something down. The negotiation took 4 hours. Cheryl's attorney tried 3 different configurations of settlement. Each one involved me forgiving some portion of the money and signing language that characterized everything as a mutual misunderstanding. Each time Leonard passed me a note. I shook my head. On the 4th attempt, with Callahan making clear that he'd seen the evidence and had a view about how a formal proceeding would go, Cheryl's attorney asked for a recess. They came back 30 minutes later. Cheryl would repay $26,000 over 18 months, documented as loan repayment. A formal acknowledgement, not filed publicly but signed and witnessed, that physical contact had occurred and was not acceptable. An agreement that she would not contact me or Patrice or attempt to influence my estate documents going forward. No defamation counterclaim. Leonard looked at me. I thought about Donna. I thought about the grandmother in Grover's family who'd signed promissory notes she couldn't fully understand. I thought about the version of Robbie I'd seen at my kitchen table with red eyes. I said yes. Cheryl signed without looking up. Her hand was steady. I'll give her that. In the parking lot afterward, Leonard put on his coat and said, "You held the line." I said, "Donna would have said I should have held it sooner." He said, "She also would have said you got there." I drove home through Dayton in the early afternoon. Normal traffic, normal storefronts. Everything looking the same as it had before any of this. At the Fred Meyer, I stopped for groceries out of habit, stood in the produce section for a while, not picking anything up. An old guy about my age with a cart full of soup cans saw me standing there and said, "You okay, buddy?" I said, "Yeah, just thinking." He said, "Best thing to do that without the refrigerators running. Too loud in here for serious thinking." He rolled on. I picked up some tomatoes and went home. Robbie called that evening. He knew the mediation had happened. He didn't ask how it went. He asked if he could come for dinner on Sunday. I said yes. He came alone. I made pot roast, the same one his mother used to make. We ate at the kitchen table. He asked me about the fishing. I told him about the Rapala I'd found. He asked if I wanted company sometime on the river. I said I did. He didn't apologize specifically. I didn't ask him to. Some things between fathers and sons live underneath words. We both knew what the dinner meant. After he left, I washed the dishes and stood at the kitchen window looking at the neighbor's yard. Lights coming on in houses up and down the street. Regular Tuesday evening, Opal's porch light was on. I brought her a pie last week. Peach. She'd said she preferred apple but ate 3 slices anyway. I still had the notebook. It was in the filing cabinet, bottom drawer. I thought about whether to throw it away. Decided not to. Not yet. Not because I expected to need it again, but because it was honest documentation of something real that happened. And honest documentation of real things deserve to be kept. Donna's photo was on the shelf above the filing cabinet. The one from our anniversary trip to Mackinac Island in 2009. She was laughing at something behind the camera. I couldn't remember anymore what it was. I said to her, I know I let it go too far." The house was quiet. Outside, a car went past. Somewhere down the block, a dog was barking. Patrice called Sunday morning like always. I told her about Robbie's visit. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Do you think he's going to be okay?" I said, "I think he's going to have to decide that for himself." She said, "Yeah." We talked for a while about other things, her kids, the Phoenix weather, whether I'd thought about coming out for a visit in the spring. I said I was thinking about it. After we hung up, I sat with my coffee and looked at the fishing tackle box still open on the side table from 3 weeks ago, still waiting to be organized. I picked up the Rapala, turned it over in my hands. 31 years carrying mail through every kind of Ohio weather teaches you something about showing up regardless. You put your head down and you go route by route, block by block, and eventually you're done. Not because it was easy, because you kept going. I put the lure back in the box and started sorting. People ask me sometimes if I regret waiting as long as I did. 26 months of checks written, excuses absorbed, warning signs noticed, and then quietly set aside. $41,200. I have the notebook right here in the bottom drawer, if I ever need to remind myself that I'm not misremembering. I don't regret it exactly. Regret implies you had a clear choice and picked wrong. The truth is I kept hoping the situation would correct itself, the way a lot of things in life eventually do, if you give them enough time. Some things do. Some things do get worse while you're waiting. This was the second kind, what I've come to understand, not from a book, not from anyone telling me, just from sitting with it long enough, is that the choices Cheryl made had a direction to them. Every time she pushed a little further and nothing pushed back, the next push came a little sooner, a little harder. That's not fate. That's just how behavior works when it goes unchecked. She tested the boundary, found no boundary, moved the line, then tested again. The shove in my kitchen wasn't a sudden eruption. It was the logical end of a path she'd been walking for 2 years, one unchallenged step at a time, and I let her walk it. That's the honest part. Not because I was weak, but because I kept choosing comfort over clarity. It felt kinder to write the check than to have the conversation. It felt easier to absorb the discomfort than to name it, but that kind of kindness has a cost, and eventually someone pays it. In this case, I paid it with a shove in my own kitchen, and Robbie paid it with a marriage that may or may not survive what came out of this. And Donna paid it by dying, thinking our daughter was sick when she wasn't. That last one is what still gets me when I sit with it too long. Donna deserved the truth. She spent the last months of her life carrying fear that wasn't real, manufactured by someone who knew exactly how to use love as leverage. If I'd drawn the line earlier, maybe that particular lie never gets told. I'll never know. That's a weight I carry and don't expect to set down. What I do know is this. Robbie sat at my kitchen table with red eyes and said he didn't know how to fix it. That was the most honest thing he'd said to me in 2 years. Not coached, not rehearsed. Just a son realizing he'd handed the wheel to someone who drove them into a ditch. He came for dinner on Sunday. We ate pot roast. We talked about fishing. That's not nothing. That's actually quite a lot. Opal's statement mattered. Leonard's steady voice on the phone mattered. Grover's call, which I never expected, mattered enormously. I didn't build that case alone. People showed up when they saw something wrong. That's what people do when someone finally stands still long enough to let them. The notebook is still in the drawer. 31 years carrying mail through Ohio winters teaches you one thing above everything else. You keep the record. You track what's real. And when something needs doing, you put your head down and you go route by route until it's done. I sorted the tackle box that Tuesday afternoon. Took about an hour. Everything back where it belonged.